What attracted you to start working with InTuition languages?
I think it was about 14 years ago. My wife and I started hosting students who'd come and stay with us. They'd have breakfast and an evening meal, and they'd go off to a language school in Brighton. And I enjoyed meeting the people, a great variety of students. And we probably did this for about 4 years. And over the course of the time, I began to um, learn a little bit more about what they were learning and how they were learning. And it was apparent to me that when they were young, they'd go into group lessons and they'd certainly have a good time, but the rate at which they learnt seemed a bit slow to me. Some of the more mature students would pay an absolute fortune and have one-to-one lessons, and I thought these guys are really making much better progress. So I wondered, well, maybe I could teach English as a sort of as a sideline, and it'll be useful to me maybe when I retire. To get to meet people. I think that was originally the reason, and to find some enjoyable work.
What do you enjoy most about hosting and teaching InTuition students?
I think, as I mentioned before, meeting people is great, and you meet such a variety of people from mostly, I have to say, Europe these days, but not always just Europeans. So meeting people, hearing about their jobs, their lives, that's fantastic. So that's a great sort of benefit for me. And the other thing I like is obviously is making a difference to people's lives. I mean, they come, they want to learn English. People are obviously highly motivated when they come and have one-to-one lessons. And so they do really make progress. The longer they stay, the more progress they make. But even in a week, although I can't necessarily detect progress, I always ask my students, have you got what you wanted out of this week? And it might be greater fluency or greater confidence or something like that. And they always say yes. And I have to take their word for it. There's no reason for them to lie, really. So, it's making a difference to people's lives. So there is job satisfaction.
Can you tell us a story about a student who really made an impression on you during their stay? What happened?
I think sometimes you learn something from a student. It's nice if it isn't always one way. And I remember a couple of years ago now, I had a Japanese student, a very, very bright guy. And he worked for Toyota. But anyway, we talked a lot about Japanese culture, and I'd been interested in haiku poems for some years. I had two different versions of some Japanese haiku poems. And I asked him to discuss with me why they were so different, as I'd noticed. And so he translated the poem again for me, and he came up with a completely different version. He said neither of the two translations, both of which are commonly available in Penguin books and that kind of thing, neither of them are very good at all, and they miss the point in lots of ways. So I learned so much from that guy, really. To be very careful about when you read Japanese poems in translation, to think that you've really got very near the meaning of them at all. So, as I say, it was nice to learn something from a student rather than for it to be the other way around.
What advice would you give to a new InTuition teacher?
If you're a new teacher, I wouldn't over-prepare what my lessons would be on the assumption that the student who turns up is going to be the student I expect. Often their English is far better than they've said it is, but occasionally it's far worse. And you don't really want to spend too much time doing detailed lesson plans for days and days ahead, which could be wasted. So prepare a bit, of course, when you're learning, how you're feeling your way about how you are going to construct your lessons, but I wouldn't put too much work into it, just in case it's all wasted. The second bit of advice, and I think I'm not necessarily in line with every teacher on this respect, but I make a great deal of use of standard English learning textbooks. My view is that the authors of these textbooks have spent years developing course materials, great exercises, reading exercises, particularly listening exercises, which are fantastically useful and valuable. So I use these probably 50% of the time in many of my lessons. And particularly the listening exercises. Listening and speaking are generally the things that most students want to focus on, and it's very easy for a student to get used to one particular teacher's voice, and so having other voices speaking, and particularly other accents speaking, is a tremendously broadening and useful experience for students. So I would always say make use of textbooks. Doesn't have to be the same one for the whole course. I've got 3 or 4 that I dip in and out of sometimes on a single day, but they are sources of wonderful exercises and knowledge.
Tell us a top English learning tip in 30 seconds.
I did bring with me these. Oh yeah, there we are. My flashcards. And I make great use of flashcards. So when in lessons we come across a word or a phrase or an expression that the student doesn't know and that we both agree could be a useful one, I write that word or phrase on one side of the card, and the student writes their own language equivalent on the other side of the card. Sometimes it's a word that's difficult to spell, so I might put spelling or SP on the card. If it's a student who's not so experienced at English, I might put the part of speech there. I might put a pronunciation guide there. I might put where the stress comes, depending on the word and the abilities of the student. So one bit of homework they all have overnight is to learn those words or phrases, and also to put those words or phrases into a sentence and write the sentence down. Then the following morning, first thing is the warm-up is I take the cards from the previous day, shuffle them up, and test their memory for the words, trying to make interesting sounding questions that involve the student recalling the words. And then I will look through their sentences and check that they've got the right sense in the sentences too.